This program is made possible by the loyal financial support of the friends and partners of Family Policy Institute.
Good evening and welcome to Watchmen on the Wall. Thank you for joining us, and we know that tonight you're going to have a riveting show. Errol, welcome to the studio.
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here, Jackie.
Well, Errol, before we get into tonight's show, which is all about the BDS campaign, which I think is a very important topic to discuss as it recently took place on the campuses all around South Africa, I think that we need to touch base because you've been overseas, you've been at some important congresses. So tell us a little bit about your recent trip to Paris.
Yeah, Arlene and I traveled to Paris to attend the Global Forum on Marriage, which is basically an international gathering of pro-marriage and family experts from all over the world that gathered together for about 3 days to compare notes, best practices, to encourage each other, and makes incredible presentations about what is happening in the world, the attack against marriage and family and religious freedom.
I think that's also part of what tonight's show is about with regards to the Israeli Apartheid Week and the BDS campaign. It's something that many of the viewers at home may be well aware of, but don't quite know exactly what this campaign is and why it's growing. And I think hopefully what will happen with tonight's show, Errol, is that our viewers will walk away educated, informed, and equipped to actually deal with the growing anti-Semitism that we see all over the world.
Which is frightening, and we see what happened in Paris recently. I was just there, and that city is still living in fear. People, military walking around with automatic weapons because the fear is still palpable in Paris. And we heard that more than 1,000 Jews have now left Paris and lived there all their lives. They've left for Israel, because they don't believe Europe can protect them anymore, because there's so much Islamic jihadists living in those areas and targeting Jews for the only reason is because they're Jews. So this program, and I'm so glad you did this program, but Watchmen on the Wall is the very purpose for this program is to inform and educate Christians so they understand what is happening around the world and all these challenges against Christianity and the Judeo-Christian worldview and understanding of life. It has been severely challenged all over the world, and we want to inform people so that they can pray. Most importantly, they can pray into it and what to do, the role they could play, how to react to these things, and more importantly, to speak up. We need more Christians to speak up in this country about some of the things we see in the mainstream liberal media, the kind of deception and distortions of Israel and even the Christian church. The Christian church is targeted as a bigoted, hateful institution because it stands on biblical Christian values, nothing else. So this show, I believe, is very important to inform and educate Christians out there. So Jackie, you did a great job with it, and I think it's going to help a lot of people understand what's happening.
Thanks, Errol. And next up, we are heading to the Jewish Museum, the Holocaust Museum in Cape Town, where we heard from some experts on the BDS campaign. We are here at the South African Jewish Museum, where we've been privileged today to have Father Gabriel Nadaf, who is the head of the Greek Orthodox Church in Nazareth, out in South Africa to be doing a press conference, basically illustrating and highlighting some of the key issues that are taking place in Israel at the moment. What is the main reason for you coming to South Africa at this time?
היא מאוד נהנתה מהנאום שלך, ושזה מסר שרוב הדרום אפריקאים צריכים לשמוע. היא רצתה לי בעצם לשאול אותך, מה אתה עושה בדרום אפריקה עכשיו? מה מביא אותך לפה?
אני באתי לשתי מטרות. המטרה הראשונה, להעביר מסר לכל העולם, שכיום יש רצח עם במזרח התיכון נגד הנוצרים. במזרח התיכון כמעט מתרוקן מהנוצרים, והעולם עדיין שותק על המצב הזה.
I'm here in South Africa for two reasons. The first is to continue spreading my message to the world for the Christians in the Middle East being persecuted today, that there is a genocide happening in the Middle East with the Christians. Christians are fleeing the Middle East, and that the rest of the world needs to wake up and not remain silent in the eyes of this persecution.
והנושא השני הזדמן גם בביקור שלי הראשון לדרום אפריקה, שמתקיים שבוע של אפרטהייד מדינת ישראל. ואני באתי גם לומר ולייצג את ישראל, להציג את ישראל האמיתית, ולהגיד שיש הרבה דברים אינם נכונים שמדברים נגד המדינה שלנו.
And the second reason is that I've come to South Africa during a week which has been claimed to be called Israel Apartheid Week. And I came as an Israeli to represent the true Israel and to show people what they're misinformed about and to spread some light on the situation.
Now, Father Nadaf, many South Africans have been fed the lie that Israel is an apartheid state. And I personally have been to Israel 8 times. I've taken tour groups there, so I know your country very well, and Nazareth as well. And for those of us who've been there, we understand that it is not an apartheid state, that there is opportunity for people to travel, to have freedom of movement. Can you share with us what the situation is on the ground for Christians who live in Israel, for some of the Palestinians or the Arabs who live in Israel? Are they really under persecution as the media would have us believe?
בשביל זה אני כאן. אני כאיש דת נוצרי שנולדתי בנצרת וגדלתי בנצרת ועדיין אני חי בנצרת במדינת ישראל. באתי לומר לאנשים האלה שמאמינים לשקרים דרך המדיה שלא כל מה שאתם שומעים זה נכון.
That's exactly why I'm here. I am an Arabic-speaking Christian that was born and raised in Nazareth, and I'm here to exactly tell the truth and to spread light on this lie.
איך אומרים שמדינת ישראל אין בה חופש ביטוי, ואנחנו כולנו בתוך מדינת ישראל אומרים מה שאנחנו רוצים בחופש ובדמוקרטיה ומביעים את דעתנו לכל העולם. אם אין חופש ביטוי, אז איך העולם שומע מה שמתרחש בתוך ישראל?
How can the world say that Israel does not have freedom for all, does not have freedom of speech, when every Israeli has the right to say and speak out to whatever he wants, whenever he wants, wherever he wants? It's the fact of the matter is, we practice our democracy and our freedoms, and I can come, as anyone else Israeli can come, and say whatever they want to whoever they want.
אני אישית פגשתי כמה סטודנטים ערבים ממדינת ישראל שלומדים באוניברסיטה בג'ואניסבורג, שהם לקחו מלגה ממדינת ישראל ולומדים על חשבונה שנה אחת פה בדרום אפריקה, ויש גם כאלה הרבה סטודנטים שלומדים בכל האוניברסיטאות בעולם.
Even this week, we've met students on the university campuses in Johannesburg and in Cape Town who are Arab Israelis that actually received a full scholarship for at least 1 year to be able to come and study in South Africa to be able to develop their academic career.
ויש לנו ברוב האוניברסיטאות בישראל, רובם שמה הסטודנטים הערבים מכל העדות השונות של בני המיעוטים. ויש לנו חברי כנסת ערבים, יש לנו שופטים ערבים ונוצרים. והשופט שהזכרתי אותו בנאום שלי פה, סלים ג'ובראן, שהוא השופט של בית המשפט העליון הגבוה בישראל, ששפט את נשיא המדינה של מדינת ישראל, משה קצב, והכניס אותו לכלא. אז איך כל הדברים האלה ועדיין אומרים שאין חופש ביטוי במדינת אפרטהייד?
In Israel, if you walk into a university, not only will you see a large majority of Arab students, non-Jewish students, but you'll also see Arab professors. And you'll go and you'll see Arab lawyers and doctors and Knesset members, which is our parliament. We have representatives in parliament. I spoke earlier in my speech today about one of our Supreme Court judges who is Arab. His name is Salim Jubran. He sent the Israeli president, the Jewish Israeli president, to prison. And so how can, after all of these things, people assume that Israel is an apartheid state?
לצערי הרב, אני יכול לומר לך שלהוציא שקר, מישהו יכול לשקר עליי בקלות, והרבה אנשים יאמינו לשקר. אבל אם אנחנו נעמוד ונאמר את האמת, עיניים, נסתכל להם בעיניים ונאמר להם את האמת, אני חושב שהאמת בסוף היא תנצח.
It's very easy in our world to spread a lie. Someone can very easily say something false and lie about me. But I do believe that if we come down and we stand up and we tell the truth and we look them in the eyes and are telling them the truth, that the truth will prevail.
I am very privileged and fortunate to be joined by Mr. Vasami. He is from Palestine, and he is a human rights activist, a political analyst, and a globally recognized commentator on the Palestine-Israeli conflict. Sam, welcome to the show, and it's a privilege to have you.
Thank you very much.
I was really fascinated by the speech that you gave today and some of the information that you shared that I think certainly does not reach the media in South Africa because we know they are biased. Could you tell us first a little bit about your background? Where did you grow up? How did you become a Israeli-Palestine commentator? Because your position is quite unusual.
That's right. Yeah, I born in East Jerusalem. I developed in a refugee camp for 33 years. I practiced the human rights career since 26 years ago. I already engaged with a lot of Israelis. I already understood the Israelis in the past 48 years, as of course I am understanding the position of the Palestinians.
Yeah.
So probably, you know, is such kind of engagement contributed more and more probably information for me to be a commentator on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Now, but most people who would grow up in a refugee camp and would have endured a difficult life would be quite bitter, probably quite hateful. And we see a lot of people, even in South Africa, who've never been to Israel, that are hateful towards Israel. Why do you think you have had the courage and the mission in your life to actually speak the truth when I'm sure there are probably death threats on your life? You're probably not a very popular figure within the Palestinian communities.
That's right. Listen, I think, first of all, my message that I must have to deal with the human beings. I don't think ever that violence will bring any kind of solution. Unfortunately, we, the Palestinians, already practiced the violence during our resistance against the Israeli occupation. We already felt. On the other side, we succeed probably during the first Intifada to bring forth a very huge recognition of the state of Israel, of the Palestinian PLO, which is the only legitimate representative to the Palestinians. We signed an accord with Israel, the so-called Oslo Accord. Yes. We, the Palestinians, already recognized the existence of the state of Israel during the Oslo Accord. Unfortunately, we, the Palestinians, received a very corrupt leadership right now, which I think that majority of the Palestinians right now are much more frustrated on their own leadership rather than they are so frustrated on the Israeli occupation. On the other side, I must have to tell you that my message is really very popular among the Palestinians. I am the one who is talking to the Palestinians. And when the Palestinians start talking under the table, they have a different nuances than on the table. I know that the Palestinians knows that their situation became worse and worse after the Oslo Agreement. I think that the Palestinians right now are people who are seeking a kind of dignity rather than identity. Because for fighting to the identity, we achieved nothing. So let us start fight for our own dignity, because there is a kind of future for our children that we must have to start securing it.
Now, one of the biggest problems that we see in the whole Palestine-Israel debate is whatever the politicians seem to do, it is not reflective of the people. And often there is corruption, there are agendas. But from your opinion, living in Israel and observing what goes on there, do you believe that the Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority can live peacefully side by side with Israel? And is there a two-state solution?
See, I didn't see that the Palestinian Authority is really trying to seek any kind of peace with Israel, by the way. We are talking about a very old-fashioned leadership, which is the youngest of them is 75 years old. I don't think that these people can allow to themselves even to think about the future of their own people. There is a huge distance between governments and their own people. I think what the people are thinking never ever been represented by the Palestinian Authority itself. I think that the Palestinian Authority is dealing much more in business, much more in financial interests, rather than any other Palestinian interests. On the other side, I think that the Palestinians already get so tired from their own leadership. I don't believe that the majority of the Palestinians believes that the Palestinian Authority is really going to bring us a state. So this is why I am trying to encourage the people that you must have to take a kind of determination what exactly you want, because you've never been represented by your own government or your own authority.
So given what you've just said, do you see any change that will actually come when maybe the old leadership die off or they move on? Are the younger people that are living in Palestine more open to living peacefully with Israel? Are they more militant? What is the feeling on the ground in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Palestine?
Unfortunately, Gaza looks like totally different than in the West Bank.
Yeah.
I think that the people in Gaza are suffering more and more. I think that the people in Gaza should have also to take a kind of measures against the Hamas, who is causing a kind of destruction to their own people. Hamas is just offering and sacrificing their own people to the Israelis. Hamas is using their own people to protect their missiles and their rockets. On the other side, I believe that the coming generation, it probably will spread a little bit shadow of hope. I think that right now we are in a lack of leadership, the both sides, the Israelis and the Palestinians. When I am talking about the coming generation, I believe that it is not a long time, because looks like that the Israelis and the Palestinians are so patient and they can wait for another 20 or 30 years. Probably a courageous leader will be born on the both sides, and then that will give a very good hope. I think that the Palestinian young people right now are seeking much more a kind of a better life for their own and for their families.
So Basam, just for the viewers at home, is there a message that you have on your heart that the Christian readers and viewers at home that they need to know and that they need to actually take with them to understand the truth of what's really going on?
I think that the Christians, as I respect them all over the world, I think that the Christians probably can be a very good message of peace. I am feeling so upset when I hear that the number of the Christian population among the Palestinians has been dropped from 20% to 1%. My heart with them. I know that they are under a kind of fear. I know that in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, after the Hamas elections in 2006, the Christian people became more and more under a kind of fear. And this is probably why they escape. I want to tell them that we still have a hope on you. You are abroad. You are connected much than us to the international community. Please try to put all of your efforts to bring peace. And this is exactly what Jesus promised us.
We want to say thank you and encourage you for your brave stance. I can imagine that Basam must face incredible threat to his life, persecution, because he is a voice crying out in the wilderness. You are saying what no one else is saying. So we want to just encourage you and say thank you for speaking the truth, and we pray that God would bless you and protect you.
Thank you very much.
So for us, it's not a discussion or a debate. We feel that it is an apartheid state for many reasons. If you look at there are many analogies to be made around why the South African example of apartheid is similar to that of Israel. But if you look at the legislation which discriminates against Palestinians, or what they call Israeli Arabs, within the state of Israel, the fact that Palestinians within Gaza and the West Bank are subjected to different law, so military law versus civil law that Israelis or settlers in the West Bank are subjected to. The fact that there are separate roads for Palestinians and Israelis, separate education systems, etc., is indicative that there is complete segregation of Palestinians and they are treated as second-class citizens versus Israelis and Israeli settlers who are not even born in Israel but have come to Israel because they get a tax rebate, etc., and they are building land on occupied territory.
Okay, and then secondly, have you actually been to Israel, or do you know anybody close to you, like family, somebody who has been there?
I've been to Israel and Palestine. I went in 2011, and you do see clear discrimination, especially coming into the country. When I first went in 2011, we went to the first border, and we were refused entry because we were Muslim and because we come from South Africa, and the people that we associated to, they're not on friendly terms with, so they assumed that we had some terrorist affiliation. And we were denied access, and then we had to go to the Jordan Valley border. And after hours and hours of questioning and searching through all our belongings, only then could we go in. And it's signs like that show you that there are clear differences in the way people are treated because of where they come from and who they are.
Okay, and then also, although the media is at large, only given sort of the Palestinian or pro-Palestinian view, there are lots of people that believe that that's not the whole truth. How do you know that, what the side that you stand with is the truth and that it's not propaganda?
On the contrary, I feel like if anybody's side is really reflected, if you want to call it sides, I think Israel is often always represented as the side of justice and the victim. And I think for a long time, Palestinians in media have been completely marginalized. So we don't hear the real story about how Palestinians are discriminated against on a daily basis. So I think it's easy for organizations or the Hasbara, which is Israeli propaganda, as you see, with Stand With Us, to come and speak at universities in South Africa and all over the world and tell us their side of the story. But we're not paid to come and talk here and support the issue on Palestine. We come here out of a moral obligation. We're not paid, we don't get free trips, we don't get student levies reduced to come and speak. So I think that's also indicative of how how Palestine is misrepresented on a daily basis. The narrative is always that Israel wants peace and that Palestinians don't. But the question should be asked, why is there this narrative? Because is it not fair for Palestinians who are oppressed, they are the oppressed and Israel is the oppressor, to resist oppression? That's what we did in South Africa. That's what plenty of countries do. So I think the question is, when you look at Israel and state terrorism being condoned by media versus what Palestinians do in form of resistance, I think it's clearly indicative that the truth around Palestine is not clear. In relation to South Africa's history is that part of the partitioning plan, South Africa received a partitioning plan when the Group Areas Act was implemented, where different South Africans were, based on their ethnicity, were put into homelands. Currently, Israel has two homelands, mainly the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So they enforce laws. They have settlements in the West Bank. They perform political arrests. They even have political assassinations of leaders. They also kill innocent civilians, which is much worse than what the apartheid regime did to South Africans. So them are saying that Israel is not an apartheid state when the entire structure of Israel and what is commonly known as Israel is of apartheid alignment.
Joining me today in studio, I have Ben Levitas, who is the chairman of the SA Zionist Federation Cape Council, as well as a guest familiar to the show, Steve Swart, the MP in Parliament for the African Christian Democratic Party. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you.
Today we are discussing an issue that is gaining a lot of momentum in the South African press, and that is the BDS movement, which stands for Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions Movement. And we've seen some of the footage of the protests that are taking place across campuses, some of the media interviews. But what I want to talk about today, gents, is what this BDS movement is actually about, and particularly as Christians, what our reaction to it should be, because I think many people are not accurately informed. Ben, I want to start with you, and particularly just as an informative marker for those at home, what does the BDS campaign actually stand for, and what are their objectives?
Jackie, this movement, I want to put in historical perspective, started long before the creation of the state. In 1947, there was a boycott movement created, and it was initially headquartered in Syria and thereafter in Egypt. And they aimed basically to destroy or abort the creation of the state of Israel before it even became a reality. So this is still the continuous aim of the boycott movement. It is to destroy the state. And they forbade travel by Arabs to Israel. They forbade Israeli airlines to fly over any Arab territories. They forbade ships from calling at Israeli ports. So it doesn't go, it's got nothing to do with the current situation. It's got nothing to do with the occupation. It's got nothing to do with apartheid. They are not prepared to come to accept Israel, to accept the reality that Israel actually exists as an equal state to all the other states on earth.
So, Ben, given that historical context, it seems like within the last few years, certainly, the BDS movement has gained a lot of traction, and people who maybe were not interested in Israel or had no particular opinion on foreign policy have now become very sort of strong proponents of human rights and even backing the BDS. So what exactly is the BDS in its current form?
So it's a very aggressive movement that is aimed at delegitimizing Israel by comparing it to a terrible crime that occurred in South Africa, to apartheid. And of course, there's no reality that there is anything like apartheid in Israel. If you want to look at apartheid, if they were honest with themselves and they wanted to condemn any country for apartheid, they should just look at the neighbors surrounding Israel and see true apartheid in practice.
Now, Steve, we've seen that as the BDS campaign maybe started in its juvenile form in South Africa as sort of defending the rights of Palestinians and of putting pressure on companies who were operating in occupied territories to withdraw and to actually, for Israeli companies to lose support. We've seen that there's been quite a lot of political interest in this, and countries are getting behind the BDS, and South Africa seems to actually be quite vocal as well. Can you share with us a little bit about, on a political side, what our government's sort of stance or involvement is with BDS?
Well, I think one's got to distinguish between the government standpoint and the majority party, the African National Congress's standpoint. I think the government is trying to take a more nuanced, objective view, subject to certain ministers. The ANC is fully supportive of the BDS campaign, calling for a product ban, travel ban, academic, cultural ban. But clearly the government realizes that it is important to have links with Israel. The government recognizes the state of Israel to exist within safe borders. But we are also, from the ACDP side, concerned about Cabinet Minister Robert Davies, who tried to introduce a labeling issue when it came to Israeli products. And thankfully, the Jewish community, the ACDP, we mobilized marches and we were able to water down what was proposed there. It is interesting that in our perspective, the BDS campaign is actually backfiring, because trade with Israel and South Africa, bilateral trade, is actually increasing. So it is an interesting point that. The other aspect is, of course, my question is, why are they focusing so much attention on Israel when there's so many other human rights abuses and atrocities taking place? If you take what's happening in Syria, Iraq, hundreds of thousands of Christians and Muslims are dying and being massacred, and we don't see the same level of attention there. Now, our leader, Dr. Kenneth Meshwe, is an outspoken advocate in support of Israel and opposing the BDS campaign. And he's been very successful in discrediting their attempts to label Israel as an apartheid state. he, as a victim of apartheid, says he has been to Israel and there is no correlation between apartheid South Africa and Israel. And I think that that is a very difficult argument to counter from a person like himself.
Now, just picking up on something you said there, the distinction between government stance and the ruling party, the ANC stance, surely even though members within the ANC who might be outspoken critics of Israel and proponents of the BDS, although they're not necessarily speaking for the government, at the end of the day, it's one and the same thing. They're aligned there. And wouldn't it be harmful, given that there's so much bilateral trade happening? Isn't it better for the ANC and for the South African various ministers within the government to just rather keep quiet and, you know, they can still hold their views, but not actually affect international diplomacy?
Absolutely, and that is what we from the ACDP side have tried to promote in Parliament, where our member Sherilyn Dudley is on the Foreign Affairs Portfolio Committee, and she's tried to persuade members of Parliament and the ministers involved to adopt a more objective approach when it comes to dealing with Israel. Yes, we understand there is a sense of solidarity with the Palestinians and going back to fighting apartheid. But that doesn't help if one wants to play the role of an objective, honest broker to bring peace to the Middle East. It doesn't help to take a view that is supporting one side. And so there are instances that we have seen government ministers coming out very strongly in support of the Palestinian cause. And of course, that is a cause of concern, because then you can't play the role of an honest broker.
So, Ben, just bringing it closer to home right now, many of the members of the Jewish community have been feeling this growing anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism from various factors within. I've seen it in Cape Town, we've seen it throughout the country. And one's mind immediately goes to Woolworths and how they were pressured with some of their tomatoes and their produce that they stock that supposedly comes from occupied territories. What is the Jewish community's response, or what is their feeling towards the BDS campaign in South Africa? Is it concerning to you guys? Is it being effective?
Unfortunately, you can't generalize about the Jewish community, because unfortunately there are some Jews who do support the boycott movement. They are, I wouldn't, but as far as Woolworths is concerned, Woolworths is perceived to be a Jewish store. Its founders were Jewish. Its management is Jewish, even though it doesn't contain many Israeli products. In fact, less than 1% of its products can be traced to Israel, and they're not even from the occupied territories. But this is where the thin line between anti-Israel or anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is pierced. This is anti-Semitism. And this is not the first time Jewish shops have been targeted by the BDS movement. Cape Gate and Fence was targeted. People were not allowed in and out of the premises. Dischem was targeted. And I can go on. Toys R Us, when it had Jewish owners, they are now not Jewish anymore, but Muslim. And I can go on. And this is basically, when you start boycotting Jewish shops, it is exactly reminiscent of what happened in Nazi Germany. It is exactly what happened in Palestine in 1929, when Jewish shops were boycotted by the Arab population. And this is anti-Semitism unashamedly.
So, Ben, given that, I mean, that's quite a serious state of affairs if it's anti-Semitism. How do the sort of leadership of the BDS movement, say in South Africa, actually respond to that? Because I would imagine that they would try to mask what they're doing and say it's not anti-Semitism. But for those who can see what's happening, it's quite clear to us.
Well, they do try and mask it. And this is where the disingenuity comes out all the time. But every now and again it spills, you know, they cannot contain it. So, for example, at Wits University, when that Israeli pianist was there, they sang, "Kill the Jew." Kill the Jew. You know, this is what happens. We were at a conference this weekend in which they were actually calling for Jews to be killed as well as thrown out of the country. So this was organized by the BDS campaign. So even though they don't like to admit that that is their ultimate goal, or that they're not anti-Semitic, you know, you cannot, it spills out into the open every time.
Do you think that that's concerning to members in Parliament and the government, Steve?
Well, it's a great concern to us in the ACDP, and I'm sure it's a concern to any peace-loving person, and particularly the Christian community. The rise in anti-Semitism, and remember it started way back with the racism conference in Durban in 2001, where they equated racism, Zionism with racism, but it basically came down to anti-Semitism, and we see that rising across the world, and we even seen incidents now, as Ben has pointed out, and we as Christians have got to take a very strong stand and say this is unacceptable, and we will stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters, and we will not tolerate this at all.
And I just want to endorse what Steve said, basically. We really feel the support and the love of the Christian community, and we really appreciate it. And we also appreciate what Dr. Kenneth Meshwe has been doing for us on campuses around America and throughout the world, because South Africa is, with its history of apartheid, is ground zero. And this is where they're trying to gain traction between what happened in apartheid times and what's happening in Israel. And if that fails to stick, if that analogy fails to stick here, then it'll have no relevance, and the lie of Israel being an apartheid state will be exposed.
So in closing, Ben, I just want to ask you one last question. You've used the term Zionism, we've spoken about anti-Semitism. Can you just sort of give us a brief little explanation? What is Zionism, and what does the SA Zionist Fed actually do?
Basically, Zionism is the connection, is the movement that connects the Jewish people to the land of Israel. And it started with Abraham, when he was told by God to get up and go to this land that I will show you. And in Genesis, right in the beginning of the Bible, there are many, many references to the land, and God pointed out the borders of the land. And Abram did as he was told. And that connection has stayed since then. So the modern manifestation of Zionism that BDS loves to attack is the manifestation of political Zionism that occurred in 1897 with Theodor Herzl. And they talk about it being a colonialist movement because it started in Europe. But it goes back much, right to the beginning of time, to the beginning of history. And that's why we feel very hurtful when people trash Zionism, because for us it goes right back to our spiritual roots.
And Jackie, just to add to that, from our perspective as Christians, we understand Genesis 12:3, that there is a blessing on those that stand with Israel and the prophetic destiny of Israel and the Jewish people. But similarly, there is a curse on those that stand against it. So it is very important how we stance and how we position ourselves as the nation, South Africa, from a political perspective.
Thanks, Steve. Ben, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jackie. It was a pleasure to be here.
I'm involved in the BDS campaign after getting an understanding of the atrocities that are taking place in Palestine, in occupied Palestine. I think it's very important, firstly, to engage with content and to engage with people that come from that setting to get a better understanding of what's going on there. And my involvement was from that particular understanding and seeing the importance of being a part of the BDS campaign and the initiatives by the PSF to assist the people and to kind of have transnational solidarity with the people of Palestine. This is something that South Africa has seen before, so it's only our duty as South Africans to get involved the same way that we had transnational solidarity during apartheid. And for Israel to be called an apartheid state, I think it should trigger something in every South African to try and find out why is it an apartheid state and what our solidarity can do for the people of Palestine.
There are actually people who are members of the PSF who are from Palestine, and from their point of view, they have families there, and I can't imagine what that could be like to have to be here and think about your family there who could be in danger. Yes, so we do have people from Palestine here who can tell us what is happening there.
With me now in studio, I have Luba Maakiso, who is the National Director for International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, and also the founder of Africa for Israel Christian Coalition. Luba, welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much, Jackie.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience working on the universities and particularly with Israeli Apartheid Week? Maybe you can just explain to the viewers at home, what is it, how did it start, and why is it becoming such a force to be reckoned with?
Thank you. Israeli Apartheid Week in South Africa is something that is organized by BDS, and it takes place at university campuses primarily, and the agents who then implement that program on the campuses is usually the PSF, Palestine Solidarity Front, which is in most universities. So if you go to the University of Cape Town, you go to Stellenbosch, you go to the Western Cape, WITS, many universities have that as a student society, a legal student society. And they then basically champion that work. The challenge we have is that there is no student society that is there to counter that message. So there is the South African Union of Jewish Students. They have a broader mandate, but it also includes countering this. And the Christian student societies on campuses do not generally concern themselves with this. The primary aim, I would say, of BDS and IAW is to convince the world, and in this case South Africa, that Israel is an apartheid state, hence the term Israeli Apartheid Week. So it focuses on really demonizing Israel and convincing students that Israel is an apartheid state, and just as they fought so hard against apartheid, their parents and so forth, the students must fight equally hard to isolate Israel, and then BDS obviously bring on the boycotts and the divestments and sanctions against Israel. It's gained traction, sadly, largely due to ignorance. Many students are ill-informed about the issue, and adults, so I wouldn't blame students alone. And due to ignorance, first of scripture, and secondly of history, and I would say thirdly, of the real facts taking place in the Middle East, it's kind of spun in a way that's appealing for an audience in South Africa. If you come to most black people and you say that person's a racist or Israel's an apartheid state, it's something we can relate to, and therefore instinctively there's an emotional attachment. But there isn't much research to ascertain whether or not that label is valid. So it gains traction. Every year they go bigger and bigger, different countries. It's billed to take place in over 200 countries. South Africa probably receives a lion's share of the time. We get a full week. Continents like Europe get 2 or 3 days. North America gets 2 or 3 days, but we get a full 7 days.
Why would universities allow this to take place and grow every year?
Well, I suppose the challenge for universities is that if you go to a place like WITS or UCT, there's freedom of speech. So in theory, the students should be able to raise whatever issue and campaign and do whatever they need to do. Now, the question is the underlying aggression? And it's well masked because BDS put themselves out to the public as an organization that's concerned about human rights and justice. And those two things will really pull anybody in. So if you take, for instance, in Sandton this last Sunday, there was an Israel Expo taking place at the Convention Center organized by the Zionist Federation. There was a demonstration outside. And if you look at the video clips, you know, I can't repeat some of the things that were said in the African languages. There were swear words being thrown at people that are quite derogatory. And there were statements, threats to kill people and so forth. So I think you have certainly an uninformed component of the youth that is tagging along. And they're not quite aware of the larger agenda behind BDS, and people are really, it's really sad. As an African, I actually feel it's exploitation, because you're taking poor African people from townships, you're busing them to a place and you're saying to them, Israel's our enemy, and they have no idea why they have to boycott Israel, why they have to do what they have to do. But it obviously makes for good sound bites and for good media coverage.
Now, Luba, I understand from what you've said why perhaps BDS would find an affinity with some of the black constituency because they've used this emotive language and context. Why would churches actually be either proponents of BDS or be quite hostile towards Israel?
There's two issues really. One would be replacement theology. And some people in the church will look at it and say, well, God had a covenant that he made with the Jewish people, and that covenant has now expired or has been broken, and therefore we're the new Israel. And therefore the desire to see Jewish people return to their ancestral homeland is not there. because in your theological view, God has given up on the Jews and moved on and discarded them, which is very interesting because God does not break covenants, and that's not biblical. But in South Africa, we have liberation theology, which is something that I've often heard with adults but not with students. And this last week I saw it where a student came to the tent and he said to us, God is always with the weaker party. Now we hear that very often. So during the struggle in South Africa, one of the ways that was used to bring in other church groups from outside the world is that if you portrayed black people as being weaker than the South African Defence Force, then your sympathy would go towards the weaker party. And obviously then you were saying God is with the weaker party. The Palestinians have said they are the weaker party in this conflict versus the Israeli Defence Force. So they've thrown that at the church in South Africa, and they've said, well, it worked for you, so surely it must work for us. That's the one element. And the second is a misguided notion that Israel is the only country that had any trade relations with apartheid South Africa. Now, I have to be honest and say that is indeed correct. There were trade relations between Israel and the apartheid South Africa, but so were they with the United States, with UK, Germany, many countries. So if you had to look at a scale, and if you look at International Monetary Fund reports as to the biggest trading partners, you would find in the 70s the Saudi Arabians there and Iran supplying crude oil. And right up until the 90s, America was there. So somehow the church looks at Israel and forgets that Israel was probably a small player in the global scheme of things. So I've seen that in the Council of Churches website, that they've used that as a reason of saying Israel traded with apartheid South Africa. But they have a program called the EAPPI, a horrible name, but it's essentially a program that takes clergy from around the world and takes them to Israel. It's funded by the World Council of Churches and locally the South African Council of Churches. So they take clergy and they send them to what they call Palestine for 2 to 3 weeks, and then they bring them back. And then when they return, they will often issue open letters. The challenge with this trip is, can you imagine living in South Africa, let's say in Cape Town or Johannesburg, you bring in an overseas visitor and you take him to, let's say, either Soweto or Danzani in East London or Khayelitsha in Cape Town, and you keep them there for 3 weeks. You never let them see anything else. And then when they go back home, you ask them for an assessment. It's not balanced. They never speak to the Israeli authorities to ask them about the stuff they've seen. So they get one side and they're told about the atrocities, but never allowed to test the validity of those claims. So upon their return, they then write about what they've seen. So the church has pretty much gone down that route.
So Liba, just in closing, what would you say are the most dangerous misconceptions that the BDS puts out there that Christians need to know the truth about, firstly? And secondly, I know that your organizations do quite, well, particularly Africa for Israel, does quite a lot to work with the church and educate Christian leaders. So if you could just elaborate that, if you are available to do talks in churches, or if you are sort of hosting any types of seminars that people can come and learn more, because I'm sure that there are people at home who are hearing this for the first time and quite blown away.
There are various organizations that are involved, and all of us have material where a person can find information, because on the one side, I think people want to look at the theological basis for standing with Israel and saying, is it in Scripture? Is it correct Scripture? So we can provide people with that scriptural understanding of standing with Israel. And for those for whom Scripture and faith is not a big issue, and say, I want to understand from an international law and those issues, there is information. So we make information available, because when you talk to politicians, they'll often say, well, I don't represent Christians only, so I must be able to understand your reasoning outside of the Bible. So that information is available. We have books, we have DVDs and so forth that people can read. But we're also available to travel to churches and to talk to them. It is encouraging that we're getting a lot of calls, unsolicited, where people will say, God has laid this issue in my heart. I'm not quite sure why, but can you explain it to me and so I can understand it better?
Well, that's great to know. And I think an important point that I would hope comes out tonight is that as Christians, we need to be educated, to be informed. We need to have a biblical worldview. It's not to say that we have blinkers on and say that Israel is completely perfect and that the Palestinians sort of take no responsibility, but it's rather to say that we need to understand what our response as Christians should be on a spiritual side, on a political front, on a social front, because ultimately this is an issue that is not going to go away, and it's gaining traction right across the political spectrum and within the Middle East as well. So we need to know what, from a foreign policy point of view, what our own country proponents, and also from a spiritual side, what we as Christians should be praying into. So thank you very much for joining us, Luba.
Thank you very much, Jackie.
That's our program for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Please visit our website at familypolicyinstitute.com and subscribe to my weekly newsletter. This is my primary method of communicating with you, so please subscribe today. If you have any comments or suggestions for the show, please write to us at info@familypolicyinstitute.com. We value your comments and your input. Remember, the latest edition of Joy magazine is available in retail stores right around the country. Please remember to get your copy. Thank you once again for joining us. God bless you, and remember to keep standing.